my concern is that SMEs have always, I mean, as you said earlier, they employ 70% of the workers, but only contribute 50% to the GDP. So the productivity of SMEs has historically been low. And these broad measures, of course, I think Mr. Heng has gone one step more into the future compared to what Mr. Tharman said. They still sound to me a little bit too broad-based and not as concrete, as I would have liked to hear, as a non-economist.
I think the government has signaled that they are no longer willing to basically to clamp down on wages to control unemployment. So you have a situation where unemployment can no longer be easily controlled by pushing down wages or costs, and at the same time, availability of cheap foreign labor is limited, so you don't have the foreign labor buffer anymore. You can fire them at will when you have a downturn. So all this points towards structural unemployment maybe being more like a normal country in the future, a normal developed country. If that happens, we do not have, I think, the social safety nets in place to handle a higher level of structural unemployment. We have a lot of schemes here and there which support people maybe for a short while, but our unemployment strategy has basically been get that man another job or get that woman another job as soon as possible.
If 1.4 million people in Singapore earn less than 1,900, now it's 2,000, and if you look at our workforce, our total workforce is about 3.2 million, and I think the resident and citizens are about 2.2. Now out of these 2.2 or 2.3 million, 1.4 million earn about $1,900. So how are we going to innovate and yet make sure that people have their jobs and support their families?
If you have to pay a company to subsidize them in order to get them to invest in something, that means that the investment didn't meet the cost-benefit test using their own money. Hey, but suddenly once you use other people's money, taxpayer money, it's okay to invest in it, right? And that leads to the basic problem, right? You can predict that a subsidy program may get captured as private benefits first, and second, is much more likely to be inefficient compared to the company using their own capital or risk capital to pay for it.
Maybe SMEs and enterprises today need more competition and less subsidies. Perhaps the solution here is not for government to try to stimulate the economy, but to expose these enterprises to more forces of creative destruction, which I believe can be the best driver of innovation and new ideas.
Can I say something real quick? I think to defend the SMEs for a bit, usually if you go to them with this argument, they would tell you, and I think they have a point in saying this, they would tell you that what they actually want is just for the government to leave them alone. In other words, they say that the government already taxes me a lot, I have to pay a lot of foreign worker levies and so on, so instead of giving me back the money through this painful subsidy process, stop taxing my foreign workers and charging levies and then leave me alone.
That's the whole point, right? So now the argument that SMEs are making is, you give me my right hand and you take from my left hand.
We had to move from a culture of value adding to value creation. This is not a line I borrowed it for someone. And value creation is scary because there are no boundaries. And when you get administrators who are, I'm speaking as an ex-administrator, ex-civil servant, where your job is value adding, to try and predict value creation, it's pretty hard because you don't know where it's going to come from. Google isn't always looks like Google. It just starts from something really minuscule, and this becomes tricky for us to try and pick and choose winners for subsidies if ever we have to do that.
The automation package, $400 million set aside over 3 years, right? And this is about increasing productivity and substituting for labor. Really, that's what it is. But is it really going to work in this sector? How fast and how many sectors can actually automate as fast and result in that displacement or the substitution of labor?
But there's a lot of things that are actually out there that, I mean, even now we check out ourselves at the grocery store. I mean, you just do it yourself. I mean, there's and that was happening, a decade ago, when in living overseas or whatever. And then you see even now, actually, I find it amazing, even just to go to a hotel and not have any check-in person, deal with you, but actually pretty much automate and do everything, almost everything yourself, other than like maybe a security validation type of thing. These are already things that do exist, in other places. I guess the question is, what is our level of exposure? What is our level of I guess motivation to a certain extent to actually end up doing
I don't understand this, sorry for interrupting. At one stage we're talking of automation, then on the other hand we're talking of structural unemployment. So how are we going to tie that together? Because there's one industry, in the aging industry, where there's a lot of services, the silver industries, and we keep on talking about aging, going to drag the economy down, but we don't look at this silver industry in travel, in insurance.
As a resource.
As a resource, we can start some...
In fact, that's a very interesting point, right? In fact, this point was raised in a different situation where I was discussing it. You see, if you define a group of people as people in need of assistance, you will not see them as potential resource. No, it's the optics of it, right?
That's right.
If you define someone as a patient, you will always view that person as needing intervention. But if you define that person as someone who could be a resource to help somebody else, then you're changing the way you look at it. Can you, for example, transfer from one sector to another? Can someone who has never done, who's been an art student all his life, and studied history in school, go and want to be an engineer, for example? I mean, is that possible?
Actually, that's an interesting point. I'll give an example of the Tech Skills Accelerator. We're trying to create jobs for the tech skills and develop. And if you look at what the Minister mentioned in his speech, I think this is a sort of a pilot thing.
Right.
So I think going forward, there could be sectors that aren't really tech related, and they could have actually involve others which are not really in the tech.
So you do see the possibility of being more open about, because people's interests change over time, right? I've seen people who have all the time been involved in a particular type of education suddenly acquire an interest in finance, or banking, because you just want to destroy other people's lives, right? So you just suddenly feel this need to destroy other people's lives, so you go into banking. That's an unmet need in you, and then you go. But is it possible for you to switch tracks?
I mean, we got a bunch of employers who come in from all around the island. And we were very happy, we were hopeful, because a lot of these learners came in, and many of them were more matured women who wanted to enter the workforce. So we thought we were doing something good. Ultimately, we couldn't even place more than 10%. Not because there were not any jobs open, They just didn't want to go beyond half an hour from their home.
The issue about getting a job too far away, her inability to take care of the child at home or in childcare, and her ability to come back quickly to tend to the child is an issue.
I was going to talk about the same point, because at Wings we train women to be cashiers, but because the employers would not give them a stool to sit down, and if you are an older woman, standing for a long time with varicose veins is quite difficult. So employers have to adjust as well. They should take women for shorter jobs and try to, but because we have become so spoiled by foreign workers, low wage workers, employers also are looking for the easier option.
Do we need such stringent criteria, 3 different types of criteria, literally jumping through hoops, so to speak, to qualify for the kind of support that we're talking about?
If of some concern is the issue of the elderly who are asset rich and cash poor. These would be the people you mentioned who might be living in maybe large houses but who don't have any cash because, they bought the house 30 years ago and now they've got no more cash proceeds. But somehow I don't think the right way to help them is to use taxpayer money to subsidize.
When an older person gets money, they don't put it under the carpet, they spend it. So GST, you earn GST, it helps consumption, and that helps the economy. So it's not that you keep on worrying about expenditure, so you don't want to give it out. In the end, it goes back into the economy. And in Singapore, we have too much of savings. We don't have enough of consumption. And this is exactly what we need.
What kind of a doctor are you?
An economical one.
Can you not? Can you remain a doctor and talk like a human being?
The solution to all this is actually not more government action, but perhaps it's less government action.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know what the panel thinks of the notion that maybe the solution to all this is the government spending less, not having all these grants and all these projects. At the same time, also reducing taxes. I'm also aware that Singapore taxes are quite low, but maybe reducing taxes even lower, and that will address the concerns of SMEs that they complain it tax a lot. So less government programs, less taxes, take a more laissez-faire approach, and let the market work its magic, like how we have seen in the gig economy. Could that be the solution?
Should we move towards a more laissez-faire economy? I'd like to cite Hong Kong as an example, because it's a very, very market-based laissez-faire economy, right? But their Gini coefficient is very, very high, which means high inequality. So is that the right direction to go? And thirdly, before we say that we should spend less or whatever, I think we need to quantify the buckets of where should we spend less, because I don't think it's all equal. Social spending is not the same as economic spending, because they are fundamentally very different issues. They address very different problems.
So when a person is already disabled and unemployable, why do you have to have a further means testing? If on top of that, you put them through means testing and they fail, where's the dignity in this?
There are existing programs that are really helping individuals like that, like through ComCare. Then through MSF, there are individuals that assess the family, and there could be some medium to long-term help for especially those which are affected through ailment. But I get your point, the feedback about very targeted for specific groups, and whether it should be included in the current budget.
What if we enlarge the equation to say, well, how about organized citizens? What about civil society?
Yes.
What about non-profit organizations? What do we do to work with and through those organizations to act on others' behalf? I think that one point related to that clearly is really to not just see the issue as higher taxes or or not kind of thing, right? Because who wants higher taxes? Like nobody, right? But actually another sort of redistribution mechanism is actually donations. Is in fact, everybody has a bad feeling about taxation, but nobody has a bad feeling about donations. If I could help somebody, actually I would have a good feeling about that. So I think that in incentivizing peer-to-peer or community-to-community support and action, I think that's a great opportunity, because not only does it sort of like have a positive kind of like effect of what your action is, it actually also builds social capital.